Hello and welcome to interest.co.nz. I'm Gareth Vaughan with another in our series of double shot interviews, and I'm here today at Fletcher Building's headquarters in Penrose, Auckland, with CEO Jonathan Ling. And Jonathan, look, thanks a lot for your time. Obviously, there's really two huge issues that are on your plate at Fletcher at the moment. One is Christchurch, and the other is your big acquisition in Australia, Crane. So, look, just starting with Christchurch, obviously Fletcher's got a key role down there, Fletcher Construction, working closely with the EQC. How are things going on the ground down there?
Well, I think it's first thing I think we need to express our real sympathies to the community of Christchurch. As you know, they had another fairly serious aftershock a couple of nights ago, and things are pretty serious down there. I think one of the things that we're learning quite quickly really is it's really hard to start the rebuild in earnest while the aftershocks are continuing. And so the response team down there, the EQR team as we call them, has spent a good deal of time over the last, or probably since the February earthquake, doing emergency repairs. I understand we've done now something like 13,000 emergency repairs, but the real rebuild, permanent rebuild, is not really underway yet, and is probably going to still take some time. So it's very frustrating trying to get everything going again, but I think the reality is that the rebuild in proper won't really start until the aftershocks really, cease.
Yeah, look, it's immensely frustrating and demoralising, obviously, for the people down there. Do you think that everyone has moved as quick as they can in terms of EQC and the insurers? Do you think people are doing everything they can to get things moving?
I think they are, and I think it's obviously a very, very complex situation, particularly with insurance, the involvement in government, the role that reinsurers play. But again, and there'll be a lot of issues to sort out, but I think the reality is it's very difficult to really get repairs going while the aftershocks continue. I think we prefer to fix things once and do it properly and be done with it, but while the aftershocks continue to do more damage, it's very difficult to really get going.
Yeah, look, and in terms of predicting when they're going to finish, it's gazing in a crystal ball. No one really knows. It's a very frustrating process. Do you think, Jerry Brownlee was saying, I think yesterday, that he was talking about no meaningful rebuilding within 12 months. I think he was talking about the CBD. But do you think that's realistic? Do you think it's going to be a year before there's any serious rebuilding going on?
CBD is a slightly different situation in the sense that there are about 900 buildings that have to be demolished before there's a clearance and it's a safe area that the CBD will open again and the rebuilding will start. So that is not, I guess the aftershocks are not really hampering the demolition efforts so much, but there's an awful lot of demolition to go on before the rebuild will really start. And I think that will take 9 to 12 months.
And out in the suburbs, obviously we're getting a big announcement from the government today on what's going to happen there. Do you think that rebuilding will be able to start there, or indeed rebuilding in new places for those residents will better start fairly soon?
Again, I think that the rebuilding, again, because of the aftershocks, it's very difficult. It's very difficult to, every time you start to rebuild something and we have an aftershock, it's got to be inspected again and evaluated to see if there are cracks in foundations and all those sorts of things. So I think, and the last thing anyone wants to do is, rebuild twice or 3 or 4 or 5 times.
And in your position at Fletcher, with these big uncertainties out there, how difficult is it making you with your forecasting and shifting your employees around and all those types of things? Well,
notwithstanding a very difficult economy anyway, forecasting at the moment is nearly impossible. And just to put things in perspective, we're part of the alliance that is starting to repair the underground pipes in Christchurch. So far, we've done about $6 million worth of work because, again, the aftershocks keep disrupting the program in terms of really getting going. And it's extraordinarily frustrating for us as well as the community. Obviously, it's affecting our volumes and the business activity and the like, and so it's really tough.
Obviously, Fletcher as a company in one form or another has been around 100 years or so, and there are people inside the business still with a lot of knowledge of the history. Is this the biggest challenge you think the company's faced?
Well, interestingly, It depends what you mean by challenge. We've been through the GFC, and so we've been through some pretty challenging times over the last couple of years. But if you're talking about Christchurch, the actual physical rebuild, once we get going, is not a complex job. From a construction point of view, it's technically not difficult. There's a large volume of work. We've got the workforce all geared up to go. We've got the contractors all ready to go. The materials are all ready to go. It's really just getting a stable platform without the aftershocks to really get the momentum going. And when that does happen, I think you'll see it start to build very, very quickly. You might recall that we had a bit of a slow start once we post the September earthquake. All the infrastructure is now in place, all the planning mechanisms, and it will be smooth once we get a clear run at it. Again, the labour force and our teams down there have been focused completely on the emergency repairs, both for householders and for commercial premises, and there's still a fair bit of work going on there, but it's not the rebuild. We're just doing temporary patch-ups to try and make it as easy as we can for the Christchurch community, both business and householders. But again, it'll take some time for the rebuild to start. And I think one of the learnings out of this is that, again, even when that happens and the whole system really goes into action, there's going to have to be, every claim is an individual negotiation between private insurers, EQC, and as I understand it now, quite a lot of issues being sorted out between the reinsurers and the insurers and the government, some of it in the courts, some of it behind closed doors, but there are a number of issues that need to be sorted out.
And look, for Fletcher, obviously you have a June financial year balance date. You're almost at the end of that. I think the steer earlier in the year was for net earnings after tax of sort of 330 to 340 million. Do you think you're on track with that?
Well, obviously, we're at a very sensitive time, but if we weren't within that range, we'd be obliged to inform the market.
And look, for next year, the analysts are picking quite a big increase. I think the median is somewhere around 592 million. How dependent do you think that is? Well, firstly, are you guys comfortable with what the analysts are saying? And secondly, how dependent is that on work getting going in Christchurch?
It's very dependent on work getting going in Christchurch. It's obviously, the markets have been pretty tough in both New Zealand and Australia, and Christchurch is a key part of what our demand will be for next year. So yes, we are very dependent on it, and I think it'll be it's an incredibly difficult time to forecast what's going on, and I think probably over the last 4 or 6 weeks, where the analysts sort of don't keep up, but we've probably had some pretty disappointing housing construction data from both Australia and New Zealand. The markets are looking pretty tough at the moment, and it'll be interesting to see how 2012 pans out.
Yeah, and obviously, as you say, if things don't get going in Christchurch for 9 to 12 months, then that will slow things down even more. Absolutely,
absolutely. There's no question about that. We're also getting a little bit of work out of the floods in Queensland and the cyclone. So, but yes, to be a forecaster right now is really tough, and we have a lot of mixed signals. And so for people like us in industry, it's pretty tough. On the one hand, we have the government economists and a lot of forecasters looking for a fairly buoyant year in New Zealand and Australia next year. On the other hand, we look at the demand that we have today, and it's pretty tough. And then we look at programs like the leaky buildings, which is taking a while for the legislation to come through, and what that program is actually going to be and the details around it. Christchurch is taking a little longer than we'd like to think in terms of getting the rebuild going. So a lot of uncertainties at the moment.
Now look, on to the other topic I mentioned, Crane. Obviously about $1 billion acquisition there. I guess just starting at the beginning, I mean, what were the key attractions for you of Crane? Okay,
well there's 2 key areas really. The first is in plastic pipes. As you know, we are the #1 in concrete pipes, both in Australia and New Zealand. Crane or Iplex pipelines are #1 in Australia and New Zealand, and that was the crown jewel that we're really after. And very happy where that is, but that gives us the #1 position in plastic pipes on both sides of the Tasman. The second area was TradeLink, which is a trade distribution chain, 240 odd stores in Australia. It is trade to the plumbing industry, but its model is very similar to placemakers. And what it will do is give us a channel to market in Australia where we'll be able to draw through not only the Crane products but Stramit and Laminex and Tasman Oliveri sinks, Fletcher insulation, those sorts of products will be able to draw through the channel, and it gives us a great opportunity for synergies and increasing our market presence in Australia.
What's your overall expectation for synergies?
Quite a lot. I think we've been quite public. Certainly they were a publicly listed company, and so there are some good cost savings from removing the duplication of having two public company head offices. Those changes have already been made, and so we've delivered on that already, and so by the time we start the next financial year, that'll be in place. There is going to be some quite good cost synergies in the distribution business, or Crane distribution business in New Zealand, where obviously we've got duplication with the placemaker's footprint but also the Hume's footprint, so there'll be some good opportunities there. And then of course, as I mentioned earlier, some of the selling synergies in using TradeLink to draw through a lot of the Fletcher building products. So over time, I think they'll be quite substantial.
So is that likely in New Zealand with the crossover with placemakers likely to involve some closures, do you think?
I think I wouldn't say much closures. We're looking at all sorts of things like store within a store, and it's more about sharing the fixed cost base, like branches and forklifts and warehouses, than it is actually closing branches or whatever. You know, we like the presence that the Crane distribution has in New Zealand. It's actually about how do we deliver that product offering and service to our customers in a much more cost-effective way.
Now, obviously, it was a hostile takeover. Are you comfortable that you didn't overpay?
Yeah, I think so. You've got to remember that this is the bottom of the cycle. Crane was a stock that was trading at about just over $20 Australian only about 18 months ago. The net price that we paid was about $10 Australian, so it's roughly half what it was at its peak. And I must say that its earnings aren't half what they were, if you look at it through the full cycle. So I think in time I'm feeling good about that acquisition from a value point of view. Interestingly, because it was hostile, we didn't do any due diligence, and now that we've owned it for a couple of months, there have been no surprises as we've looked at the people. I think are terrific. So I've visited a number of the sites now, and I like what I see, and I think it's going to be a great opportunity for Fletcher Building.
Now look, New Zealand residential housing market obviously very weak. I think the last building consents figures were the lowest for an April month ever. They're still trending very weak. What's your outlook for the residential housing market?
Yeah, it's a bit hard to tell. It's at a very precarious position right now. The stats are looking pretty tough. Having said that, the reality is that unemployment is low in both Australia and New Zealand. The householders financially are in pretty good shape. Because unemployment's low, interest rates are low. We've had tax cuts on both sides of the Tasman. The householders are deleveraging or paying off debt at an enormous rate right now, and that's actually fundamentally a good thing for economies in both Australia and New Zealand to reduce debt. But it'll need the confidence to actually change, and that'll happen, I think, in Australia and New Zealand. It'll happen quite quickly when it does happen, but exactly when we're not sure. So there's nothing structural that is actually holding back the increase in demand in housing, and it will happen, but it is a cyclical business, and we just need some of the confidence to be restored. And when that will happen, whether it's in the next weeks, months, or a year or two, I'm just not sure.
I think we spoke about a year ago, and we talked about deleveraging then. It's interesting; it's still going on. I mean, any idea when this big wave of deleveraging is going to come to an end?
I don't. I think the one good thing is that New Zealanders and Australians are saving like they've never have before. I think we have confidence that probably they'll start spending again once they get a bit more confidence, and we'll just have to wait and see. Having said that, I think particularly in Australia and with Crane, there are a number of other initiatives that are happening, and as well in New Zealand, that have been particularly good in terms of the timing of the Crane acquisition. We've just won our first coal seam gas contract in Queensland that was worth $50 million. So, within a week or so of getting control back in April, they'd won this contract. We've had the announcements now for broadband in New Zealand and the NBN rollout in Australia. You use a lot of the plastic pipe as conduit for that, so there's terrific opportunity there. There was an announcement by the New Zealand government for, I think it was a $400 million spend in irrigation in the South Island, with $80 million to be spent next year. That's terrific for the pipes business. So there are a lot of other segments in mining and resources. Agricultural sector is looking pretty good at the moment. So yes, housing is down in both countries, but there are a lot of other sectors that are actually looking quite buoyant. One of the things that we haven't publicised much in New Zealand or Australia for that matter is that the farming sector has just had a terrific year. The milk prices are at record levels, but more importantly, commodity prices for meat, lamb, wool and livestock is at, I wouldn't say all-time highs, but certainly highs over the last 10 years. And so the farming sector is in pretty good shape. And yes, they're paying down debt and things at the moment, but they'll start to invest back in farms and dairy conversions and all those sorts of things. So I think the commercial sector is probably more likely to rebound a little faster than the residential. And as you know, we're pretty well spread between infrastructure, commercial and residential. And
just in terms of the Australian residential sector, when and if and when that does rebound, what does Crane give you to help you benefit from that?
Oh, that's true. Well, obviously all the plastic pipes that go into the housing sector is important, but also through TradeLink and the front of all the sale of the toilets and the bathroom fittings and all that sort of stuff. They are quite dependent on residential. So again, I think that will be helpful. One of the things to remember, though, is that Australia hasn't fallen anywhere near like what New Zealand has. Australia in the peaks was doing about 180,000 houses, and they look like, in the sort of worst case scenarios, doing something like 150,000 houses next year. So it's down, but it's not, massively down. Whereas in New Zealand, at peak we were building 30,000 houses a year, whereas at the moment we're looking at a market that's less than half of that. And that's a significant drop.
There's been quite with that big drop in New Zealand, especially in regards to Auckland. There's been quite a lot of talk of ultimately there being a housing shortage. Do you see that happening? And what are your views? There's quite a bit of debate around with the Auckland Council now in terms of whether the urban boundaries should be pushed out or whether we should build more sort of medium and high density housing. What are your views on that?
Well, I think there's two things really. Is that people will live in housing that they can afford. And so what's happening at the moment, when they can't afford it, they just double up and you get more people per house. And so the ability of a city to house its population will always be there. The real question is, how many houses, per individual. The answer to the question in terms of the urban planning is it needs to be balanced. The reality is you get into the bigger cities, and quite frankly, in the Australian-New Zealand context, Auckland's not a big city. Melbourne and Sydney now, they're 4 or 5 million people cities, so whereas Auckland, I think, is up to about 1.2 million. But with the Super Council, it's a great opportunity to get the urban planning right. It needs to be a balance of higher density living in the inner suburbs. That has to be the way it goes. But you also have to have both decentralisation of job opportunities or jobs and an expansion of the boundaries in Auckland. You need to do both. You can't do just one. It's not a matter of one or the other. And you need to do both in a sensible way. And hopefully, as the council settles down, there'll be a great opportunity over the next 5 years or so to rethink all that and start to plan the city well and build it well.
Well, thanks a lot for that, Jonathan. That's Jonathan Ling, the CEO of Fletcher Building, and I'm Gareth Vaughan from interest.co.nz.